Okay, so what happens when you have, you just don't have pi over a particular number and you're looking for the given angle measure? So this is saying the sine of 3 pi over 2. So once again, 3 pi over 2, you could look at it as a unit multiplier, but you know that pi is the same thing as 180 degrees. So I'd first just take my 2 goes into 180 degrees 90 times, or half of 180 degrees is 90, and 90 times 3 is 270 degrees. So we want the sine of that. So if you look at your unit circle, and remember it's cosine sine, which means x, y value. So you're looking at the y value of 270 degrees, and that coordinate point is 0, -1. So your answer would be -1. Now, if not, you can remember the sine curve, and your sine curve looks like this. So, of course, this value is 90, which means 180 divided by 2. Here you have another 90 degrees, which is just pi. Then you have 3 pi over 2, or 270 degrees. And then here is 4 pi over 2, which means just 2 pi, or 360 degrees. So if you look at the curve, you see right down here is where the curve lands, which is at -1. So your answer is -1. So let me type that in here real quick. Move on to the next example. See if there's another one that appears to be that way. Okay, tangent of 180. Tangent is sine over cosine. So if you use your unit circle, I'm going to keep this up here. If you use your unit circle, there's 180 degrees. So tangent does mean opposite over adjacent, but tangent also means sine over cosine. So this coordinate point value happens to be an x value of -1 and a y value of 0. So if it's sine over cosine, sine is 0 over cosine, which is -1, you get an answer of 0. If not, you look at your two curves, and it is sine over cosine. So here's your cosine curve, 90, 180, 270, 360. So 180, you have this value here for sine, which is 0. Cosine is -1, which is the same values that we got over here by looking at the unit circle, and you're back to a value of 0. I don't know what they do for this particular program if they ask for undefined. I suppose they would just put undefined or does not exist. I'm not quite sure if they'd ask you for one of those for this one, but it is undefined at certain angle measures. Okay, the sine of pi. Pi means the same thing as 180. So once again, the sine of 180 degrees is 0. Whoops. All right, now you have the cosine of 135 degrees. Now that's a little bit different because we didn't mark those on our hand. So you're wondering, where is 135 degrees? So what we have is that bow tie effect that I talked about in a previous example. 135 degrees is going to be over here in the second quadrant. And remember, you always want to draw your triangle going down to that x-axis. So if you have 135 degrees here in your reference triangle, you need to know what is this angle measure in green. So you're going to take 180 and you're going to subtract that 135 from it, and you're going to find out that you're talking about a 45-degree reference angle. You can go ahead and use your special triangle to help you with that. The other thing is they do say cosine, so you got to remember all students take calculus. And when they say 135 degrees and they want the cosine, cosine in that second quadrant is negative. If you remember that a coordinate point is the cosine comma sine, which is what you do when you use your hand trick. Cosine in the second quadrant, you're referring to the x value. So of course your x value, you are to the left of the origin, so that does have a negative value. Sine, you are above the y-axis, so that is positive. So we know that cosine will be negative. So you look at your hand trick, and we know that if we talk about that reference angle we were referring to is 45 degrees. So you're going to fold in 45 degrees, which is your middle finger. And the cosine is the top values, which is going to be radical 2. The palm of your hand is 2, so you have radical 2 over 2. Same thing as you were doing when those reference angles were in the first quadrant. Just make sure you draw your bow tie effect. But then the other thing you want to look at is what sign is it? Is it positive or negative? And it is, once again, cosine in the second quadrant will be negative, or you're talking about your x values, which is negative. So this one has a value of let me see if I can get it here. Negative radical 2 over 2. Okay, so if we look at this next example. Now you are dealing with the tangent of 5 pi over 4. So if I talk about 5 pi over 4, what you look at once again is I like to look at it in degree measure. That's easier for me. If you want to know, I don't know, you could look at your unit circle if your college professor had shown you that. But pi means the same thing as 180. So you have 180 divided by 4. If you divide it by 2, you're at 90, and then divide by 2 again, you're at 45, or 180 divided by 4 is 45. So you're going to take 45, which is what this part reduces down to, and then divide by 5. I know my reference angle will be 45 degrees. That's what that part's going to tell you. And then if you talk about times 5, there's different ways you can look at it. I envision that I have 45 degrees, 45 degrees, 45 degrees. So you talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. I don't actually have to figure that 45 times 5 is going to be 225. I don't have to make that calculation, but you can. What I think about is I envision where 45 degrees is, and I have 2 of them in 90 degrees. So the fifth one puts you into that third quadrant. And they are looking for tangent. So tangent in the third quadrant, if you look at it, all students take calculus, tangent will be positive in that third quadrant. So I know that my answer will have a positive value. Now I want to know if you go and calculate that as this full rotation here, is that 225 degrees, or the same thing as 5 pi over 4? Then you still are going to have to figure out through the bow tie effect, make sure you create your bow tie correctly, but through the bow tie effect, you're wanting to know this reference angle right there. And 225, if you subtract 180 from it, if they happen to have given it to you in degree measure, then you are going to end up with a 45-degree reference angle. But like I said, when you simplify that pi over that denominator value, that's going to tell you what your reference angle is. This value of 5 tells you how many of those you have, which will tell you which quadrant you're in. So we happen to be in the third quadrant, 45-degree reference angle. Tangent in the third quadrant is positive, and now you talk about the tangent of 45. So the tangent of 45 degrees, your thumb, your pointer, your middle finger, your ring finger, and your pinky, 45 degrees is going to be that middle finger. Then you flip your hand over for tangent, so you have your pinky, your ring finger, your middle finger, your pointer finger, and then your thumb. And that's just either your tan, but you'd already folded down that middle finger because you're at 0, 30, 45, 60, and that thumb's always 90. So you flip it to see your tan, and the tangent's going to be the top over the bottom. So the top 2 fingers is radical 2. The bottom 2 fingers is going to be radical 2, and radical 2 over Radical 2 over radical 2 is going to be 1. So the tangent of that will be 1. If you look at it, I don't know, another way you could look at it is you could just figure out what that coordinate point's going to be. And that coordinate point, you could look at what the cosine and the sine values are going to be. And the cosine value is radical 2 over 2. And the sine value is radical 2 over 2. So then you're talking, it's negative, sorry, and negative. So tangent is sine, which is negative radical 2 over 2, divided by, it's sine over cosine, and the cosine is negative radical 2 over 2. Negative over a negative is a positive, and then radical 2 over radical 2 is just a positive. So I know this one might seem a little deceiving because it is in that third quadrant, but tangent is positive in that third quadrant, and the reason for that is because both x and y values are negative, and a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So you do get positive 1 for a value. All right, now they're going to switch it up again just a little bit, and we're going to ask you, what about the tangent of negative 45 degrees? Or not, well, yeah, negative 45 degrees, but as you look at this one, you have negative pi over 4. So you're going to have 180 divided by 4, which is going to be 45-degree reference angle again. So if you look at what quadrant you're in, the negative says that you're going to go backwards your 45 degrees. So we have a 45-degree reference angle. That's going to put it in the fourth quadrant. And then you, once again, do all students take calculus. And we're going to find out that tangent in that in the fourth quadrant will be negative. The other thing you could think about is your x value is positive, your y value is negative, your cosine value is positive, the sine value is negative, tangent is sine over cosine, negative divided by a positive is a negative. So I know my answer will be negative. Maybe I shouldn't put that there because I'm not going to be able to click on it. So you have negative, and then we just talked about what the tangent of 45 degrees is. When you fold in your middle finger, you flip your hand over so you can see your tan, and you get radical 2 over radical 2. So that just has a value of 1. So the 45-degree angle in the third quadrant had a value of 1, but in the fourth quadrant has a value of negative 1. And it didn't click for me. Now you look at this one, and you have negative 135 degrees. So once again, we want our reference angle. And this is the way I work through it. All of these, you could be using those special triangles with that ratio of 1 radical 3, 2 or 1, 1 radical 2. I use my fingers, or I have the chart memorized. But all right, the sine of negative 135 degrees. Negative 135 degrees puts you over here. You're going to go backwards your 135 degrees. So if you just take 1/8, because then you want to draw your reference triangle. So your reference triangle, the bow tie, you always go up or down to the x-axis, not right or left to the y-axis. So if I went from here all the way around, that's going to be 180 degrees. So if I take away the 135 degrees that's there, you end up with your 45-degree reference angle. So I know this angle right here is 45 degrees. They are asking me for the sine of 45 degrees. And then I figure out all students take calculus. Tangent is the only trig function that's positive in that third quadrant. So I know my answer will be negative. And then we go with the sine of 45 degrees. So hold up your hand, and if you fold in your middle finger, 45 degrees is going to be radical 2 over 2. And it will be negative because of that quadrant that it happens to be in. So we're going to come here, and it's negative radical 2 over 2, and you get your value. One last one that I'll work through here for you. And then I'll see. Hopefully, this is getting a lot of these down for you. The next one, negative 300 degrees. So I know that negative, I'm going to drop down. So I'm at 90 degrees, 180, 270. So I'm over here in the first quadrant. So if this has 300 degrees, I know that my reference angle, when I drop my triangle down for the bow tie effect, my reference angle is going to be 60 degrees. All trig functions are positive in that quadrant. If you put your hand up and you fold in your pointer finger for 60 degrees and you look for the cosine value, that's going to be 1/2. So your answer for this one would be 1/2, and it's going to be positive in that quadrant. Okay, so hopefully this helps with this part. If you need more examples, let me know.